We stand here tonight on the eve of Slichot and just over a week away from the start of 5782. Like, I imagine, many of you, I have spent a lot of time reflecting back on this last year and trying to remember what was going through my head a year ago today. From what I'm able to recall, there was a lot of talk this time a year ago about how here and around the world, the high holy days would be unlike any other. I think that promise, that prediction, proved true. We were also talking a year ago about vaccines that were under development, that were in testing, that were going to be ready in just a few more months. Do you remember what we were worried about a year ago? Thinking back on the news, the articles that were coming up were concerns if shipping companies would be able to keep the containers of the vaccine cold enough so that they would not spoil. There was concerns if enough of those little glass bottles could be made to package all of the vaccines so it could go out into the world. And a few months later down the road, there was concern if and when the FDA would say, yes, that extra bit of vaccine in the little glass jar, if there's any left after 5 doses, you can use it to give a 6th dose. We can get more people vaccinated. These were all challenges. I remember at the time they sounded daunting, but I also remember having hope that once it was all just sorted out, once the distribution got going, we were all going to be okay. All we had to do was to get from here to there. A year ago, we might not have had a date nailed down, but we had hope. I had hope that soon this would all be over. I don't think many of us imagined that we would be here now, preparing for High Holy Days where the world around us looks unlike most other years, but more or less the same as last year. Except for now. Now, there is no obvious antidote. There is no magical solution. There is no vaccine on the horizon for us to look forward to that will make this all go away. In our Torah this week, we read Parshat Ki Tavo as we come close to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Chapter 28 has 69 verses, which gives it the distinction of being the second longest chapter in the Torah. The chapter opens with God reminding Israel that their whole purpose, the whole task of being an Israelite, is to obey God. And the chapter continues and goes on and describes rewards that will come from doing so, from obeying God, and punishments that will come if they do not obey God. The rewards section comes first, and it promises general prosperity and successes in life. The rewards section, that's 14 verses. The remainder of the chapter, 55 verses, well, that describes the misery that will come if the Israelites turn away from God. Adonai will let loose against you calamity, panic, and frustration in all enterprises you undertake, so that you shall soon be utterly wiped out because of your evil doing in forsaking me. If you build a house, you won't live in it. Though you plant vineyards and you till them, you will have no wine to drink or store, for the worm shall eat them all. It goes on, 55 verses of that. Terrible as these all sound, and there are many far worse than what I just quoted, they're at least fairly straightforward to understand. Your business is going to go bankrupt, someone will kick you out of your house, your crops will fail. These are all things that we know can and do happen. But there's one prediction or one curse that I will admit it took me by surprise. It stood out the first time I saw it. And that is this. In the morning you will say, if only it were evening. And in the evening you will say, If only it were morning. At first, I read this as a promise of just being generally dissatisfied with life, akin to, when you want an apple, you will have only oranges. As far as curses go, it's a pretty good one, but it seems just a bit mundane compared to the rest of the chapter, especially when you consider what comes after this promise. In the morning you shall say, if only it were evening. In the evening you will say, if only it were morning, because of what your heart shall dread and your eyes shall see. This is about more than apples and oranges. The commentators, they share my surprise at this verse, but they also provide competing theories on what they think it's trying to say. When it's evening, you'll be so distressed you'll wish it was morning, but which morning? Rashi says you're going to wish that it would go back to this morning, to the time before. And Rashbam says you're going to wish to go forward to tomorrow morning. And it's fair if we ask ourselves, well, really, what's the difference? Either way, you're miserable and you're wishing it was some other time. But Rashi goes on and explains his thinking of wanting to go backward. He says that your plight is forever getting worse. Today, you wish it was yesterday. But by tomorrow, it's going to be so much worse that you would have settled for today. And so on down the line. The commentator Bachor Shor backs this view and cites a verse from Proverbs that you do not know what tomorrow will bring. And he argues it could always be worse. On the other side is Rashbam. And he says if you're miserable now, you're going to wish it's tomorrow rather than yesterday. And so what is his rationale? It's the sort of thing someone with an illness says, he explains. Or at least someone who expects to overcome an illness. I just need another day to get over this. If you are anything like me, over the last year you've thought and maybe said some version of, I can't wait to get back to normal. A year ago, at least in my perhaps naive eyes, that did kind of seem possible. At least in my mind, vaccines would go into arms, COVID would go away, and life would come back. But over the last year, and especially over the last few weeks, that idea of the future looking like the past, that seems increasingly unlikely. Thinking about what the future might look like, perhaps it's one where masks become a permanent part of our wardrobe whenever we walk into doctor's offices or grocery stores. Or maybe it's a future where planning a vacation means checking hotel availability, checking flight prices, and checking COVID forecasts. Or maybe it's a future where summer camp and college will forever begin with quarantine weeks. It is natural to wish we could go back in time and even to hope that the future is going to resemble the past. And this type of thinking is a powerful and, yes, a necessary tool. For all those parents who said 18 months ago, this is utterly overwhelming, but I just need to get through forcing my kid to sit through virtual elementary school for 2 weeks. In hindsight, we might laugh a bit. But at the time, that kind of thinking kept a lot of people going. Thank God that at the time, we didn't know how long those 2 weeks would really be. On the eve of 5782, it's impossible to say what next year will bring. But what we can say is that we cannot go back to 5780. No matter how tempting that sounds. When it's morning, you'll wish it was evening. Our community has suffered a broad spectrum of pain during this pandemic. Later in the service, when we read our Kaddish list, it's longer tonight, and not just by one name. It's longer because of this disease. For those here or those watching, we realize there can be no comparison between the loss of human life and everything else that we have lost. But no matter the level of our personal trauma, we are, I think, united in all of us wishing times were different. It is natural to wish for what we know, what we remember, what we cherish, what we have seen. But I think Rashbam has something to teach us. Let us, in this dark time, wish not for yesterday, but for tomorrow. Even if, as the book of Proverbs reminds us, we don't quite know what tomorrow will bring. Yes, it is true, we have no idea what 5782 will look like. And yes, it's true, we might find ourselves a year from now wishing it was now. We might find ourselves saying, if only the variants had stopped with Delta. Of course, that is a possible future. But there are other possibilities. Let us, on this Sabbath evening, wish for morning, for the morning to come. Wishing for the past is natural, but with COVID, with anything in life, wishing for the past, it will lead to disappointment. Instead, let us maintain a peculiar form of Jewish optimism. Optimism that says, difficult as today might be, and uncertain as tomorrow is, we can always hope. We can hope it will be better. For those of us who miss the world as it was, who don't feel ready to look forward to what is unknown, now in this holy season of teshuvah, of returning, now is the time to reorient. Now is the time, as the world is born anew a little over a week from today, now is the time to make that change in ourselves. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.